This is one of these games that always gets circled on the calendar, especially this year. Ohio State in Happy Valley to take on Penn State. The winner will have an inside track to the Big Ten championship game. We got Pat Murphy on the line from Bucknuts 247 Sports to break it all down for us. Pat, how you doing?
I'm good, Mark. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So here we go. We've sliced and diced this one up in the past. And again, it has been an Ohio State dominated series, but it's usually been a struggle and a really competitive, great game. But let's go back to last weekend because that was not supposed to be a competitive game. It's a 25-point favorite, and it was a bit of a nail biter at 17-14 down until 6 minutes left when Ohio State mounted a drive and then hung on for dear life despite some officiating question marks. Your thoughts overall before we really start to break down where the issues lie against Nebraska?
Well, I think you have to point to Ohio State's offensive line play first and foremost against Nebraska. Losing Josh Simmons, the left tackle, who had been playing really well against Oregon, was going to be a blow. I think most people expected Zen Michalski to come in as he did and play better, given what he did at Oregon, which was not perfect, but you have 2 weeks now to prepare as a starter. You're a 4-year player within the program, and he was not great, to put it lightly, on the left side of that offensive line. I think he gave up 4 pressures and 2 sacks. And then Zen Michalski got hurt, and it looks like he'll probably miss some time. So I think things start there because obviously you need the offensive line playing well. And it wasn't just Zen. The offensive line in general did not play as well as it has most of this season. Ohio State had its season low in rushing yards with, I think it was 64. Just couldn't get anything going that way. Will Howard ends up having a pretty good day, 13 of 16 for 221 yards and 3 touchdowns. But 16 pass attempts is by far the lowest Ohio State's attempted this year. And it was just drives being stalled by the offensive line. Mostly, there were some other things as well, but the offensive line struggling. But the defense, I think if you're looking for a positive, bounced back after getting, hearing for 2 weeks how poor they were against Oregon, giving up nearly 500 yards and 32 points. So I think that's a positive. You saw some different things in terms of formations, some more 3 down fronts on the defensive line. Things like that I think are positive signs going forward. And while Nebraska does score 17 points, Ohio State held them out of the end zone until the fourth quarter. It was a lot of short drives. You look at the drive chart, and the only drives that were longer than, I think, 6 plays for Nebraska were the ones where they were able to score. And like I said, 3 field goals in those drives. So I think you feel better about the defense, but I think Buckeye fans would have felt much better, especially heading into that big game against Penn State, if it had been a more balanced performance by the whole team.
So, Pat, I'm going to backtrack to the offensive line because I think there's no question that is the sore spot by far at this point. So not to pinpoint one player, and obviously he's not going to play this week, but once Michalski was in the game, you mentioned 6 stat-driven plays. It is egregious when you can pinpoint an offensive lineman that was responsible for the play being blown up. And it just seemed like play after play after play after play. When they showed the replay, it was like that's the issue. Wow, he gets thrown into Howard's lap. Howard's having to scramble and then just throw a pass away or run, or one of the backs is looking for a hole and boom, somebody's thrown in their lap and it's coming basically from the same spot. Not to excuse the offensive line in total, but that being said, that game's in the books. Going forward, what seems to be the lineup for the offensive line?
It'll be interesting to hear what the coaching staff has to say as we talk to them throughout the week. But I imagine they will do what they did at the end of the game after Zen got hurt, and that was move left guard Donovan Jackson to left tackle. And then I believe they brought in Luke Montgomery to play left guard. You could also put Austin Sareveld in there, who started that position for Donovan Jackson earlier this season. Look, Donovan Jackson hasn't played tackle since his freshman year when he was kind of the sixth offensive lineman, the Bison role, as they call it, for the Buckeyes. He's been a starting guard for the last 2.5 seasons. So this will be a bit of a transition if that's the approach Ohio State takes. I don't think we can talk about this without bringing up Ohio State's struggles in recruiting on the offensive line. And I've kind of given Justin Fry, the offensive line coach, a bit of a pass because I do think he is much more of a developer than he is a recruiter, or at least that's how things have played out during his career and even his time at Ohio State. The problem is you don't have time to develop these guys right now, right? And there's not I was talking with some other guys, reporters after the game. Like, I think at a lot of schools, maybe you put in a younger guy, a sophomore, a redshirt freshman on the offensive line in this type of situation who doesn't have experience, but was a highly recruited kid. And yeah, he has to get up to speed of playing this game maybe earlier than you expect. But Ohio State doesn't have a ton of that. I mean, like I said earlier, Zen Mikowski, a fourth-year guy who hasn't been able to crack the lineup in any of those seasons, and now it's just an injury that puts them in there. And honestly, I expected Zen to look more like he did on Saturday against Oregon when he's thrust in there without any prep than kind of the other way around. So certainly this is an issue. We knew that there wasn't a ton of depth on the offensive line, and now you're having to deal with that. I've heard a number of people saying it. This is not an original thought, but it will be very unfortunate if an Ohio State season that, all these guys come back and everything we talked about all off season gets derailed because of these struggles on the offensive line recruiting, which is something we've talked about for the last couple of years and really hasn't gotten fixed.
That said, Pat, I would agree that the offensive line recruiting has not met the standard of an Ohio State recruiting standard. However, I would bet, without running the metrics, and this is one of those times when I wish somebody else would do it because it would be an exhaustive job to do, but run just simply the offensive line recruiting rankings versus the rest of the country. I got to think that they're still in the top 15 in the nation. And if you would take the top, let's say, 3 to 4 offensive lines in each conference, especially the Big Ten and the SEC, I would think that many of those, going to your initial point about development, are as much developed as they are just flat out recruiting talent.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I don't know, again, what the numbers are or where they would rank if you just looked at offensive linemen. And look, let's give Nebraska some credit too. Jamari Butler and Ty Robinson both had good games. They're good defensive linemen that cause problems. And, Nebraska obviously recruits too, right? And develops and all those things. But, I don't know if it was more of Zen, just kind of had 2 weeks to think about what his first start would be. And maybe there were some nerves. I did think he sort of started to settle down in the second half and it was better, but it still was problematic. And I think you're right. That it's not just the starters that have to get developed. And I guess that was kind of more what I was talking about, just in the sense that this offensive line had come together pretty nicely, especially once Donovan Jackson got back in there, and Justin Fry deserves some credit for that. But also you need those backs to be ready. That's something Ohio State's talked about all offseason is we're going to need depth at every position and whatnot in this long season. And it did not look like the depth was ready on Saturday. And that is, part of the development process as well as having those guys ready. So I think it's fair to give out some criticism there as well. And look, Donovan Jackson gave up a pressure that I think led to Will Howard. It may have actually led to one of the Will Howard sacks, but it was Zen's guy who ultimately got home. But Howard had to step away, move to his left because there was a rusher coming up the middle. There was another play I thought Will Howard probably could have done better in terms of buying some more time, and he ends up going down instead of throwing the ball away. We can put a lot on the offensive line, but I do think, and I still need to go back and rewatch the game in its entirety. I'm going to look at what the running backs, if there was maybe some space that they didn't get. I didn't notice that live at the stadium, but it's certainly a team game, but it has to start up front. And the offensive line as a whole was just not good enough against Nebraska. And, you're midseason, you're about to go to Penn State. You got some other good teams on the schedule here coming up. It's not what you want to see if you're a Buckeye fan. I'm not saying that the sky is falling, but it certainly didn't look great.
Pat Murphy, Bucknuts 247 Sports. That is your best destination for Ohio State football coverage to get you set for the Penn State game. Please like the video here and subscribe to the Voice of College Football. And yes, there seems to be narratives that get targeted and then they become the groupthink narratives that's the entire issue. It's a lot more nuanced than that. I still think that Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins are the two best backs on any particular team in America, but are they perfect? No. I'm sure they could have made different decisions in seeing a seam or a gap or a push in an area, but at 2.7 yards per carry, they're obviously much better than that. So it was generally the offensive line. Will Howard, I get comments and calls here regarding Will Howard. He missed a throw. Well, of course he missed a throw. He's a college quarterback. He threw the ball 25 times. He's going to miss one or two throws. Other than that, I think the guy's playing really well.
Yeah, I mean, the stats bear that out. I mentioned just the Nebraska game. He completes 81% of his passes for 221 yards and 3 touchdowns. The interception was bad, no doubt about that. I'm still not sure. I've watched that play back several times. Still not sure what exactly Will Howard saw there, kind of overthrowing Emeka Egbuka. But, the defense steps up on that drive, keeps Nebraska out of the end zone. And so all's well that ends well with that one. 2 weeks ago at Oregon, Will Howard didn't make a mistake like that. And that was kind of a talking point going in about both him and Dillon Gabriel. Would one of those quarterbacks throw a bad interception? Neither of them did. So, yeah, I agree with you. Will Howard's been as advertised, if not better, since coming from the transfer portal. I think he's put in a lot of work. I think that you've seen things improve. There was a lot of talk last week, in Columbus about Will Howard's deep ball throwing. Now, the first one to Carnell Tate probably could have put a little bit more on it, but catches it. It's a touchdown. The second one to Jeremiah Smith. Now, Jeremiah Smith is wide open. I'm not sure what Nebraska's secondary was doing there, but he puts it out in front of Jeremiah Smith. He catches it full extension. It's about as perfect of the throw that you could have. So I think positives to see that from him. And he's, we probably don't talk about this enough, but he's really become a vocal leader of this team. And if you watch when they go to huddles and things like that, you see teammates, and I know fans don't get the opportunity to do that, but see teammates around him. When we're over there at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center, like, this is the leader of the offense, one of the leaders of the team. He may not be a captain. He may not have been in the program all 5 years, but certainly is making an impact in that way as well, which he doesn't get statistical credit for that, right? But is also equally as important.
And then on that final drive to get it jump started, it wasn't an extremely long pass, but it was longer in the air than it was in terms of yardage to Carnell Tate, where he was pretty much on the left hash and throwing to the right side, that deep ball to Carnell Tate to get that drive started for about 30 yards.
And right, real quick, Will Howard said after the game, because he was asked, why, after so many drives where you guys were struggling, why were you able to get something going on that last drive to get a touchdown? And he pointed to that play and said, we got positive yards and we got moving on that first play. He said that's crucially important to any drive, but especially one where you maybe haven't been playing as well as you want. So, that play was huge. And probably won't go down in most people's memories as a big play because it's not a touchdown or whatnot, but certainly, sparked that drive to get the Buckeyes going.
And of course, everybody's got to remember the connection that even though you've got these wide receivers who are just out of this world, you need time to hit the big plays to them. Yep. And if you can't trust the offensive line, then you're going to try to, and you would hate to have a situation where the play calls are being dictated by a weak spot or two along the offensive line. And that hampers the offense and what you can do when you've got all these weapons everywhere.
Yeah, and I think there were plays, even Zen Michalski, where he was good, where he held up and kept his man, from getting pressure on the quarterback. You mentioned those deep shots. Those aren't the ones that stand out, though, right? They're not the ones that they highlight on TV because he doesn't get beat. They are, not ones that people are going to think about because it's not obvious. You have to be looking specifically for that. And so, I think it was a very up and down day for the offensive line in general, but there were positives too. And, I was talking with a friend of mine and they were like, do you think there's any chance that the offense was just trying to be vanilla, heading into the Penn State game in a week's time? And I was like, I don't think so, because you've already played an Oregon game where you had to show most of your stuff. So I doubt there's much that the Buckeyes are hiding. from Penn State. But it did feel like, thinking back on it, it did feel like they weren't doing a ton. And maybe that was because of the offensive line, and they didn't want to stress too much in a game where they figure they'll probably win just because Ohio State's the more talented team. But it did feel kind of vanilla. I will admit that.